I'm back, Clearwater Cubs, with the grasshopper and the ant. Now, on the previous video, Miss Clack got a little bit ahead of herself and stopped with the essay. I was going to explain the essay, but first forgot to tell you that before you can complete the essay, you had to read the grasshopper and the ant, which is a fable. And I know that you all took the time to read this important part before you read the fable, which tells you the genre. Of course, at the top, it reminds you of all the important vocabulary words that were used in the previous story as well. The genre is a fable or a short story in which a character, usually an animal, learns a lesson. We've read lots of fables this year, and we've actually read other versions of the grasshopper and the ant, so I know this was very easy for you. You had a lot of background on this fable before you actually had to read it in this text. The text focus, boys and girls, was to remind you that a moral of a fable is the lesson that a character learns. After reading this fable, use your own words to tell what important lesson the fable teaches. Now, in class, we've spent a lot of time figuring out the morals of fables, and one of the fables that we've read was the grasshopper and the ant. Now, if you remember Miss Clack telling you that there are many different versions of some of these stories. So you can read 3 or 4 different stories called The Grasshopper and the Ant, and even though they may be similar and the main characters are the same, some of the actual events that happen in the story might be just a little bit different. Sometimes some of the versions are maybe a little bit funnier or sillier than some of the other versions. I really like the illustrations here. They're pretty comical. You can tell the ant is telling the grasshopper what he should be doing here. Okay. And then at the very end, it actually tells you the moral. Now, we know that all fables don't do this, but some fables do. Some fables actually have the moral or the lesson to be learned stated at the end of the story. Can you think of another word for moral or another synonym for moral? Yep, I know you got it. Theme, that's right. The theme of a story is the lesson that the author wants the reader to learn. In a fable, the theme is called a moral. So when we're reading fables, you may, in a question, be asked about the theme, but more than likely, you're going to be asked about the moral. So moral is the word that means the same as theme, but is used when referring to the lesson learned in a fable. So I'm going to go back, boys and girls, to your Day 8 directions. Of course, it says to read The Grasshopper and the Ant on 222 through 224. And then you're supposed to go back and think about the stories of migration or The Grasshopper and the Ant. It says with a partner, meaning like a parent or a sibling, a brother or sister, pretend to interview an animal from the journey, stories of migration, or The Grasshopper and the Ant. Ask them what they would do to prepare for winter. Write down the answers, then write a summary of what they would do to prepare on the space provided on the Day 8 section of the assignment sheet. So boys and girls, that's what you would write here for Day 8. And then for Day 9, you had to actually read the following story called What is a Fable? And in this story, or it's actually informational text, the author gives an example of what a fable is, or teaches you what a fable is, and then goes on to give you some examples of fables. Okay, let's check our answers. Number 1, part A. What is the central idea of the text? The answer is fables or stories about animals to help readers learn important lessons. And then for part B, we know, boys and girls, that when we're answering a part B question, it ties and goes back to part A. So they're connected. Which quote from the text best supports the answer to part A? That means I'm looking for a detail or details that help explain why C is the central idea of the text. And the answer is C. Fables have a moral. A moral is the lesson it teaches. And of course, this comes from paragraph 3 in the text. Now, we can't determine the paragraphs by indentions. Sometimes we read stories or we have articles on tests or quizzes, and the authors don't always indent. Instead, they put white space in between the paragraphs. So that would be paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, and paragraph 4. Well, if Ms. Clyde can get the page flipped here, we'll be moving along. Okay, and then number 3, which of the following describes how the information is organized? Boys and girls, this one was a little bit tricky. I would accept A or C for this one. I think technically the answer should be A, but A and C pretty much say the same thing. A says the author defines or explains what a fable is and then provides examples of different fables. C says the author provides examples of fables and then provides a definition of a fable. Technically, when we go back and look, the author tells what a fable is and then gives an example of a fable, then tells a little bit more about what fables are. Here it says a fable is a story. A wise author would write the fable to tell a lesson. Well, then it goes on after this example talking about, let's see, what this was, the story about the crow. And I can't remember, boys and girls, which fable that is. I can't remember the whole title of it. But anyway, there is one about a crow where the crow actually gets fruit from a garden, gets it, but then as he soars or flies away, he tries to show it off. And whenever he does that, he ends up talking and says, look, I got the best fruit. Well, whenever he opens his mouth, then, of course, he loses the fruit. So it's a fable that kind of teaches a lesson about not being boastful and foolish. But then it goes on and it tells a little bit more about fables. Fables have a moral. A moral is the lesson it teaches. So that's why Miss Clyde would consider C also an appropriate answer. So A or C, even though A is probably the best answer. Right, number 4, how do fables differ from other stories? Meaning, how are they different from other stories? Now, remember, you need to be writing in complete sentences. I wrote an example or a sample answer here for you. Yours should be similar, but does not have to be written in the exact same way, as long as it basically says the same thing. Fables are stories that have a moral or lesson to be learned. Most fables have animals in them. Whereas, boys and girls, all stories don't have animals in them. Some stories are true stories. They are realistic fiction type stories. Like, just thinking about a story that we read recently, Each Kindness. That's an example of realistic fiction. Maya and Chloe are real people that talk in the story. There are no talking animals in the story. So, fables are different than other stories because they have talking animals in them that actually learn a lesson that we can learn from in real life. Okay, And then number 5, it says, from reading the article, how do fables try to teach us what is good? What do you think fables were intended for and why? Describe a story that you have read and learned an important lesson from. Boys and girls, there's more than one part to this question. So make sure you answer all parts of the question. How do fables try to teach us what is good? Who do you think fables were intended for and why? And then describe a story, just any story that you've read in the past that you learned an important lesson from. I'm going to give you a hint. We've all read the story about Little Red Riding Hood, and we've discussed in class what lesson Little Red Riding Hood learns from her adventure in the woods. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and then the next video will be on day 10.